Welcome to episode number 3 of AI Tech Talk with Nate and Mike. Hey, Nate, how are you? Welcome to episode
I am
number
doing
3.
well. I'm just going to mute this double live stream we have here. But I'm really excited. We're going to have a great conversation. We've done this 2 other times. I think we're learning every time, and we've got a lot of good topics to dig into today.
And there were so many people who were engaged last time, asking questions, sharing comments. And I really want to encourage people to share your comments. We're going to take the comments that seem to be most interesting. And I know the Substack people do this already, but if you're on LinkedIn, answer questions for other people. Let's be helpful and collegial. Nate, right? I mean, that's like.
I was going to say, love my Substack community. You guys are already doing it. So let's just keep answering those questions and keep popping in the questions. And what do we want to start with?
Well, let's see. In the world of AI news, which is more bizarre, getting more bizarre all the time, this one's really important. The leader of Albania was, I'm quoting here, pelted with trash because he appointed an AI powered minister to his cabinet. Now, this is true.
An AI-powered minister. And what was the minister responsible for?
Oh, Nate, I'm so glad you asked that question because one would think if you're experimenting with an AI powered minister, you might make him responsible, or her or it or they, I don't know, but you'd make them responsible for, I don't know, happiness in the community.
General Happiness Minister. Actually, Bhutan has one of those, Mike, but I don't think it's AI powered. But no, what did they do?
Okay, so this person was responsible, this thing is responsible for procurement. And I'm reading here, I'm
Oh my,
quoting, responsible for bestowed the power with complete control over public contracts, which will make government logistics, quote, 100% corruption free and transparent. All government contracts. How's that?
well, it sounds like we can move the corruption from the government official to the person entering the prompt. Is what it sounds like to me.
Uh, yeah, I guess, all power to the techies.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, we're not worried about, incorrect decision, probabilistic LLMs making different decisions for different cases. None of that, right? We just give all the power to the AI and let it do its thing.
Yeah, well, what could possibly go wrong, Nate?
I actually don't think I have a sheepskin long enough to write a scroll for the number of things I can think of that could go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, why would you? And hi, Ryan Kyle for saying hello, and Sonia Naz for saying hello. Yeah, I don't know if you're going to start with this AI experiment, which reminds me of the Bitcoin experiment in El Salvador some time ago. But if you're going to start with an AI experiment, sure, why not start with all of government procurement?
Low stakes, low stakes. What else happened in the world of AI this week, Mike?
Well, let's see. Of course, there was Meta released their new AI glasses, and you wrote about this, and you recorded videos about this.
I had
So
some pretty strong opinions about that one.
yeah, so why don't you tell us what happened, Nate?
Well, let's just say we have the official story from Meta about what happened, and then we also have the tech explanation of what happened, and then we also have inference from the event itself, which I watched. And so I'm going to go through all 3 layers because I think it's an interesting story in the art of presentation and spin. So the official story is these were just one of those little glitches. Famously, like nothing went right for Meta on the AR demo. They were demoing a $799 product that's a pair of glasses. The idea is It gives you a screen that augments your world, and it's seamlessly connected to Meta's AI, which is Llama, and it does all sorts of useful things. And infamously, it could not pick up an incoming phone call for Mark Zuckerberg during the demo. And when someone tried to do a cooking demonstration, the AI seemed to think that you needed to make some sort of mixture in a bowl to sustain your sandwich making art. It was very like confused about what making a sandwich was all about. And I the official explanation is these are just the hiccups that go with launching a new product, and demoing live is something that takes a lot of courage, which I fully agree with. And then, this will be fine long term. But the techie explanation, I actually dug into that a little bit. Apparently, what happened was the team wanted to get Mark's glasses on a development server for dedicated bandwidth. They wanted to avoid this problem, but they inadvertently wired everyone's Meta devices in the room into that server as well. And so they DDoSed their own development server when they had the demo happen. And that's the official explanation. To me, that only partly explains what I saw. Like, it explains some of the traffic issues and some of the delays and all of that. It doesn't explain cases where the AI seemed to get genuinely mixed up. And I think one of the persistent issues we've seen with having AI in device in the world is that it seems to sort of lag and not fully understand what is going on in the present time, the way we humans have like very clear understanding of like, this is the present moment, this is the decision I need to make, right? The only AI system that I've seen that reliably handles that sort of present moment inference is self-driving cars, right? So if I've been in a Waymo in San Francisco and it understands where the cars are, where the people are, where the scooter carrying the delivery is, and it avoids all of those things in present time. That is not what we see with these AR glasses, and I think that is some of the bar that we need to clear to get these devices actually out into the world.
Well, you're talking about real time activation. You're talking about the real time aggregation and accumulation of data. If you think about a company like Waymo or a company like Tesla, that is their business, right? They are in the data, the real time data collection business, and there's a lot at stake.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Meta deals with lots of real time data as well, but the stakes are much lower. What happens if Meta screws up? Well, your Facebook feed, something happens to it, or the glasses are not connected right. So the culture of Meta is different, I would argue, than the culture of a company such as Tesla, where there are real lives at stake if you screw up with your real-time data.
I think it's partly the sort of the real lives piece. It's also partly the culture of software versus the culture of hardware. Um, and I think when you have a hardware culture, which Elon's companies, generally speaking, have very strong hardware cultures, you think from the chipset up, you think from the power source up, and that's just the way hiring is done. That's the way teams are built, and so on. But when you have like a software culture, if you have a social engagement culture, which is really what Meta has built for 20 years, you're thinking in terms of the customer experience is going to drive engagement for you, and that gets into your devices as well eventually. And I think that those cultures are actually profoundly important. They get into team organization. I think they get into eventually the shape of what you ship. I think Apple is really suffering from that now. Just to switch over, Apple also has a particular culture driven by the iPhone and their success with devices. And it's a hardware culture, but it's a very different hardware culture than, say, Tesla, because it's about surprise and delight. And I think that that is also proving to be a challenge for them in the age of AI.
Well, Apple's an interesting case because you're missing the genius of Steve Jobs. And Tim Cook is obviously an extraordinary leader, but what's his background? It's supply chain.
It's supply chain.
And manufacturing optimization.
Yeah.
So that is much more of a financial or an accounting
Hmm.
mindset than the innovation aspect. I mean, Steve Jobs was famous for his maniacal attention to detail, to every
High
detail.
standards. Yep, exactly. We have a few questions starting to come in on the Substack. Now, I want to pull one out that I think touches on the Albania side, but brings it home to, say, the United States or the EU, maybe. Based on where the state of development is with LLMs, this is from David. What would be a good IRL test drive for government integration, if any? What do you think, Mike?
Say that one again. The state of LLMs, what would be a good test drive for government?
Government integration. Let's say we're not Albania. We don't want to give it procurement. What would we give it?
I think you would want to start with kind of low impact use cases. You're not going to bet the farm. Now, it needs to be important. So, for example, why not equip call center workers with AI helpers?
Yep.
Because I don't know, Nate, when the last time was that you had to call the IRS or any other government agency. Not a fun, not
It's
a
not a
fun
fun experience.
experience.
No, it is not.
So why not use AI to make those call center agents more efficient?
I think one of the interesting opportunities with sort of that pathway is that a lot of the determinations that are made by government with regards to, say, LLC filing, or maybe selecting for an S corp, or maybe you're talking about benefits elections of some sort, they're fairly cut and dry. They're like decision trees that you run, and you can go through and see what you're going to see at the end. That suggests to me that it would be possible to have effectively a clean little agentic workflow on the back end of a voice conversation agent that could then run through that decision tree in real time and get you potentially more accurate service and faster service.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, sorry, I
yeah.
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead. That's sort of where my head goes.
Yeah, the problem with that is these cut and dry decision trees are actually not.
Mm,
Depending on now, if you say for the average person, okay,
mm,
the average person, the decision tree goes A, B, C, D, branches
mhm.
off into F, Y, X, Y, Z, what have you. But then you get into the edge cases. And for example, if you think about Medicare, which has been in the news so
Yeah.
much lately, it turns out that Medicare is wildly, wildly complicated.
Yes.
And you then magnify that from the federal out across all of the states.
Hmm.
And that's the reason why so many of these Medicare IT projects in the early 2000s failed, like massively
Well,
over budget.
let me give you, actually, this is going to tie into a question I'm seeing in the chat here. I've seen two questions, one from Scott and one from Jennifer, around probabilistic model responses, basically what happens when the models are not predictable. I think that ties into this idea that it is difficult to handle complex systems like Medicare in a reliable manner. And I want to suggest that if you're having issues with probabilistic model responses, and maybe it's just you and Claude Code, or maybe you're designing an imaginary system where you're working with all of Medicare, in both cases, the way forward is actually to think in terms of building blocks and components that you can define very discreetly. So for Claude Code, it is what is the tools Claude is calling, what is the markdown file for context that Claude has, what is the structured prompt that reduces uncertainty for Claude so you can minimize your probabilistic escape vectors, which is a fancy way of saying the things that Claude doesn't want to say, right? Like you don't want Claude to say that. Similarly with Medicare, if you look at it less as we have to write deterministic software or we have to write an LLM that answers the whole system, and more as these 6 use cases represent a meaningful chunk of the total number of Medicare determinations, and we can imagine an agentic workflow that helps, and all we need to do is have very, very clear off-ramps to humans for the rest, it becomes a way to start to bite off the problem in pieces and reduce the consequences of LLM uncertainty.
Yeah, the, I'm making excruciating faces here because if we enter now into we leave the world as it exists and we enter the world of fantasy as we would like it to be,
Mhm.
a number of things happen. So, first off, we don't have LLM uncertainty.
Mhm.
Okay, we have uh, probabilistic, almost deterministic LLMs that give the answer that you want.
Mhm.
Okay, and we're nowhere close to that. Number one.
No.
Okay, we're not anywhere close. We're getting closer and closer and closer, but to some extent, it's asymptotic. Like the closer you get, the farther away you are. You're approaching zero, but you never quite get there. And when
Yeah.
it comes to important decisions like Medicare or financial decisions, that's not good enough. So that's number one. Number two is the rules, the real world rules behind the tax system, behind Medicare, are so damn complicated. Again,
Mhm.
now you could build a system that handles, let's pick a number, 2/3 of all of the cases because they're cut and dried and they're pretty straightforward. But then you need to be very careful that in that last 5% of cases that are complicated, that the machine never makes a mistake.
Yeah.
Every
And
mistake has a cost, a
that's
real
right.
cost.
It's high stakes. And actually, this is a sort of a slightly different direction to take this. We've been talking about government, but talking about education for a second. One of the things that really concerns me about the prevalence of AI text detectors is that they have real world consequences for students, including expulsion in some cases, but they're not reliable. In fact, the false positive rate is really concerning. I saw an example recently where someone sent out a very well written proposal to a client. This is not, this is, and the client ran that proposal without consent through an AI text detector and came back and said, "You made this with AI." And the truth was, they hadn't made it with AI. It was just well written, and the scam detector didn't work and generated a false positive. That jeopardized the client relationship. Those kinds of false positives are impacting real lives. And it reminds me that we need to be really thoughtful about our downstream externalities when we design these systems.
Well, there's also, I believe it was OpenAI was inserting certain patterns of spaces in between words so that if you just simply cut and paste, it would generate this signature essentially showing that you had copied the information, your result from
Mhm.
ChatGPT. But this is part of the set of very complicated issues of what happens when this technology hits the real world.
Hmm.
And you have a high stakes environment that has real consequences for real people.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and we're not fully used to designing non-deterministic systems in these environments. We're used to designing programmatic systems.
Yeah. Oh, we have a great paper reference here from Mira Murati in her Thinking Machines lab talking about this idea of designing deterministic LLMs. And really, she thinks she has a path forward with thinking labs. Obviously, we're a ways off from that. But Randall rightly called out that that's something that we may start to see eventually, is a situation where we have some of the advantages of LLMs, but we may also have full predictability.
Yeah, that paper is a pretty interesting paper. I forget their valuation, but it's super, super high. The amount of money.
They are valued on the fact that Mira is a founder of OpenAI, right? And I think that's true for any OpenAI founder alum. Like they get valued on the potential. Ilya got found sort of valued on that potential with safe superintelligence as well. And that's just sort of part of the privilege of being part of that sort of very exclusive club.
Yeah, speaking of high valuations, I'm sure you saw the news yesterday between NVIDIA and OpenAI.
Yeah, yeah. It's an eye-popping number,
A
$100
hundred,
billion. dollars.
yes, 100 billion.
Um, I don't I don't even know how to begin to unpack that, except to say that I think one of the things I was reflecting on, I made a TikTok video about this last night as I was sort of thinking out loud. We have a different class of risk with OpenAI than we have with other model makers now. Not really related to quality of models. Claude is great quality models from Anthropic. We have great quality models from Google and others. But OpenAI is receiving so much investment and in turn driving so much investment for other major companies that there's a different class of risk around their performance. And it's worth naming that explicitly because a lot of that $100 billion dollars is going back to NVIDIA for chips.
Yeah, you have this round tripping where NVIDIA invests money in OpenAI that then spends that money buying $4 to $5 million, 4 to 5 million
Correct.
GPUs.
Well, and you saw the same pattern, Mike, with Oracle like a week or so ago, where Oracle did a big investment, but part of how that happened was that OpenAI is buying from Oracle for the Stargate data center and other data center projects. So again, the money goes in a circle.
The money goes in a circle, but they are scouting out between 700 and 800 potential locations
Hmm.
since unveiling Stargate in January.
Hmm.
And this is 10 gigawatts. That's enough to power all of Manhattan and all of its boroughs. I forget the number of times over, but it's a lot of juice.
The scale is something that I don't think we're really prepared to see until it happens. It reminds me, like at a smaller scale, this is what Amazon did when they built out their 2-day Prime delivery network and eventually accelerated it to 30-minute delivery in some cases in urban areas. There's this tremendous sort of footprint that had to be enabled for inventory to do that. And it was a massive build process. And I think that AI is going to be even built bigger. Like you're going to have even bigger sort of data center requirements. And I think one of the interesting things is they are betting explicitly on a cloud future, but NVIDIA has another iron in the fire with the NVIDIA Intel deal. Because NVIDIA is betting with Intel that we're also going to want local LLM compute. That we're going to have a special guest for our live stream, Mike.
Oh,
We're going to have a new buddy here for our AI conversation.
oh, how nice.
Yeah, yeah. But what I was saying is that NVIDIA is betting on a consumer, um, a consumer AI future as well as a cloud AI future. And so they win either way, but it's not clear that the cloud providers win either way as a whole.
Yeah, well, how much of this is a Ponzi scheme? And by the way, can you hold her up and I'll tell you why?
Okay.
Because the name cards on the video were hiding her. Oh, look
Oh,
at
I
how.
see. Yeah, there she is.
Hi.
Yep, yep. She's doing great, holding her head up, learning about AI from the get-go.
So cute.
Yep.
So so to what extent do we have this almost Ponzi scheme like situation where the stock market, to at least a certain extent, is being propped up by all of the enthusiasm and the real investment that's being made in these AI companies and the AI infrastructure? Because we anticipate that in the future there will be the productivity and the benefit gains.
I think One of the most interesting charts on the market that I have seen was a chart that essentially showed it was superimposed, right? It was a chart from the stock market in the early 2000s and the late 1990s and one now. And the early 2000s, late 1990s one was basically a chart of the stock market since the release of Netscape Navigator, which for those of us who have very gray hairs, we remember. Um, and it was superimposed over the chart of the stock market since ChatGPT was released. And what's amazing to me is that they track really, really well. And so if you think about it as less the valuation of individual companies, and we can go on into like what is Oracle doing, what is NVIDIA doing, what is Google doing, et cetera. And you think about it more as the trajectory of the valuation of public companies over time, you can start to get a sense that maybe this is a new general purpose technology and investors are trying to come to grips with what it means to value the impact of a new general purpose technology. And we'll just have to see how it plays out, but it looks like it's a rising tide that lifts the boats.
Yeah, but isn't that the definition of a Ponzi scheme? A rising tide that lifts the boats, where Peter is
Well,
paying Paul?
if you have real water, it's not. If you have fake water, then yeah, it's a problem.
All right. What about uh, the tulip craze? Do we? So let's not call it a Ponzi scheme. Let's call it the big, beautiful AI scheme.
So I think the difference with this is actually I've made a little bit of a study of the tulip craze because one of my hobbies is studying sort of the formation of corporations and how we got the joint stock corporation, and a lot of that is sort of wrapped up in tulips and the Dutch East India Company and this and that. One of the interesting things with the tulip craze is that beyond the idea that you could have cultivars that looked pretty, there wasn't a lot of utility for it, right? Like you couldn't like take the tulip and eat it. You couldn't take the tulip and like make it do work for you. Like it wasn't a horse, right? Like there's not a lot of value there, but people liked them. And people could produce new tulips in ways people didn't fully understand. I I think the difference here is that it's very, very clear that you have usable work done with AI. And you can argue about how much, and you can argue about who gets to do that work, and you can argue about sort of what the right ratio is as far as work done by agents and the quality they do versus work done by people. But there's no question that there's a lot of sort of output coming from this particular technology in a way that we didn't have with, tulips, which I grow in my garden. I still like tulips. They just don't cost as much as my house.
No, that is a very fair point. There is the level of implication of AI on society is deeply profound. There were several articles this week on internet companions,
Hmm.
and there was also along the way an MIT study where they described AI boyfriends. And
Hmm.
there's actually a Reddit group that is dedicated to people who are dating AI chatbots.
Well, if we want to go back to stocks, Mike, there are discussions on X among hobby investors about what the right portfolio of bets is if you believe in the AI boyfriend phenomenon versus the AI girlfriend phenomenon, which I think is just the most hilarious conversation to have among hobbyist investors. It's been very, very lots of fun to watch. But it's a real thing, and I think it underlines this idea that we as humans have a very strong ingrained ability to imagine the other, right? Like one of the things that this little one is starting to figure out as a baby is that when we interact, like we have a model of the other person, right? And children go through that development phase predictably over the first few years of their lives. Well, because we go through that, if we talk with an LLM and it talks back like a person, we start to have a mental model of that LLM as a person. And so that's where you get into the companion space, which I would argue is actually a much more sort of positive direction to take it than into some of the spaces that have been associated with mental health issues, that have been associated with safety issues. where you start to sort of become very dependent on a conversation with an LLM. Like I know people, I get some odd emails in my inbox, and I know people who have reached out in distress or very upset because they didn't realize that the LLM has a context window. And the LLM will run out of context window at a certain point, and they associate the LLM with personhood, with agency, and they don't really understand why the LLM suddenly can't talk to them anymore.
According to this research, 19% of Americans have already used AI chatbots for virtual romantic flings.
Easier than Tinder, I guess. I don't know. Like that's a really interesting one.
Yeah, I don't, I have a hard time really understanding that. I mean, I can understand the reasons behind it, but I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss, but California has just passed a bill that says it will require AI companies to include reminders for users they know to be minors that their responses are AI generated.
I think we're going to get a lot of motion around sort of how we handle minors and chatbots. There's an active investigation by the FTC going on right now around that. There will probably be court cases coming up around what constitutes acceptable use, what constitutes due diligence by companies to protect minors. In a sense, I think we've done a better job handling sort of minors as a use case on the internet than we have understanding how the internet can be a healthy public square. I think the latter is very much something that we haven't really solved for as a society, but the former we've done a little bit more on, and it looks like um, we are finding a similar pathway with AI where we're leaning in on the minor protection angle, but maybe not fully understanding some of the other implications.
There are I'm almost at a loss for words because again, the implications of AI on our social fabric are so profound because look at the impact on jobs. I mean, we've spoken about this a lot. So you have the potential psychological issues associated with children or adults becoming dependent on models. And oh, parenthetically, as you know, one of the issues that OpenAI faced when they released ChatGPT version 5 is the writing style, the response style was different than with version 4.
Mm-hmm.
And this having relationships, whether it's romantic or otherwise, but the relationship with the model was disrupted for so many people. They found it distressing that OpenAI was forced to then re-enable those older legacy models for people.
Someone argued that that was the first example of evolutionary selection pressure for LLMs, where GPT-4 essentially had developed a strong enough parasocial relationship with society that it was able to exert selection pressure and sort of put itself back into the chat when OpenAI made a product decision to let it go. I was a bit surprised that they decided to make such a dramatic decision to cut off. I think typically speaking, when you have that big a user base, you want to cut over a little more gently. I understand they had GPU constraints like crazy, right? Like they had to anticipate a big surge in demand. They had to figure out with their surge in demand what they were going to prioritize. And so there were some real constraints they had to work with. But from a consumer experience perspective, it was really jarring, and I think it left a very bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths.
You know, we have an interesting comment from Frank Francisco Quintana Rivas on LinkedIn who says he watched some bad reviews for NVIDIA and OpenAI from an analyst at Bloomberg. And he says he's wondering if we are approaching the 3DR AI winter. The consequences could be devastating at a global level, worse than any previous crisis. And Ryan Kyle also says on LinkedIn that OpenAI has always been a linchpin for the AI market. If they fall in any way, there will be huge repercussions. And this raises such an important point that regardless of whether there's a shell game that's going on with the money going back and forth in an incestuous way, however you view that, the the implications for the financial implications are profound. I mean, look at the amount of money that NVIDIA has and its valuation. And by the way, one of the reasons that NVIDIA is investing so much is because they have so much money. They have to do something with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is that the rational actors that are playing the game, by which I mean the CEOs of the big model makers, right? The ones that are deciding where to allocate this money, or maybe Jensen, not a model maker really, but a chip maker, they are very publicly stating that they are not looking to optimize to ROI over any kind of medium-term horizon. And so the when we evaluate the expectation of returns that way, we're not even playing the game they're playing. And so this is reminding me of when Amazon went public in 1997. Jeff B wrote a very open letter to investors in which he said, if you are investing in this company on the basis of some dividend expectation or cash flow return expectation, go invest elsewhere. That is not what we are in the business of doing. We are reinvesting to grow the business, and we will be doing so for a very, very long time to come. And it was over 20 years really before they started to turn a successful profit. That is the kind of mindset that the CEOs driving these businesses are adopting. And it's even more the case because they believe that winning has extremely high stakes and they don't know the cost of winning. And so they're basically pouring their treasuries into solving this problem, and they'll sort out the returns later. But everybody else is looking at this through the traditional ROI lens and saying, where's the ROI? And they're not, right? Like they're not behaving in that way. And I think it's worth calling that out.
Yeah, you could also call out the .com collapse at the end of the 90s, where
Mhm.
there was a similar. I remember buying furniture. Well, there was a. I remember buying a desk at that time, and the desk was really cheap. And I thought to myself, I think it was furniture.com. I thought to myself, this is incredible. I have a VC subsidized desk because
Mhm.
it was so cheap. And then you had, I'm dating myself here, you had Cosmo.com, for example,
Mhm.
that you could order, I don't know, uh, a pound of butter, a quart of milk, and they would send somebody out on a scooter to bring it to you with no minimums.
Yeah.
And
I mean, Uber rides were $3 just a few years ago.
I remember ordering, like tiny little things just for the novelty at that time
Mhm.
of thinking, okay, there's somebody from some distribution center, there's something happening in a distribution center in a warehouse, and it's putting all this stuff into motion, and a physical, real thing actually shows up.
So I think there's some differences I want to call out, and this gets at some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat. I'm getting questions around one, how do we keep up? This is overwhelming. There's so much to follow. And then two, where do we think the top will be? Like, will there be a point where LLMs will start to decrease? And I think that one of the things that is different about AI versus sort of the dot-com experience is that even if marginal investment were to start to drop versus current rates, you would still be on a trajectory where you would get more and cheaper LLMs for a long time to come that are better and better because LLM technology proliferates. It's very easy to make new LLMs. You can't keep them in a box. Other people can go and get them and make new ones. And so it has a quality of self-reinforcing feedback loops that we did not see in the dot-com era. And so I don't foresee a world where LLMs are going to get dumber. I don't foresee a world where LLMs are going to get more expensive. And I think that that's going to lead to cheaper and more abundant intelligence for the foreseeable future, as long as we can sort of look out over the horizon. And what that implies from a keeping up perspective is that it is starting to make a lot of sense to very intentionally align your passion, your interest, your unique domain expertise, the things you're interested in, with a particular corner of AI and just double down there so that you become someone who has, perhaps general expertise in AI, but very specific expertise in how AI relates to, I don't know, interior design, how AI relates to skateboard manufacture, whatever it may be. And I, I think that that specialization is something that gives people room to showcase an intersection of skills that's really powerful. Because I actually don't know very many companies that are hiring for generalist AI. I know a lot of companies hiring for specific AI skill sets with specific domain expertise, and they can't find them.
Who was it that there was one of the major tech companies that just let a whole bunch of people go because they did not need generalist AI folks. They needed
Hmm.
specialists. Was it Meta? I don't
Meta did
remember.
have some layoffs in their AI division recently, actually.
Yeah, it was just within the last week that I was reading about this. But it was people, maybe it was Amazon actually. Uh, but they were the generalists. They have people that basically tag different items in order to classify them, to categorize
Hmm.
them. And the point was that they felt generalists were no longer sufficient and they needed to have people that were specialists in various domains, which, by the way, is a sign of maturity because initially, you think, when you start anything, you start at a high level, at a general level. And
Hmm.
then as you gain more experience with it, you need more specific, precise, and detailed knowledge.
And that's actually one of the things that I really have been sort of in transparency grappling with on the Substack is I have been writing as the field has been maturing. And so now there are both generalist content pieces needed and also highly specialized content pieces needed. And sort of building a content stream that has both has been a really interesting challenge over the last, I want to say, 6 months, as we've seen a lot of specialization across the field.
Yeah, I have the same issue with CXO talk. That on the one hand, really the question is for the particular audience, what do they need? What do they want?
Hmm.
And if your audience is bifurcated and you have people that want to learn about the topic generally versus people that have deep knowledge already, then the content that they're going to want is going to be different.
That's
And
right.
and for me, as I'm selecting guests for CXO talk, like that's definitely one of the issues that I'm thinking about all the time.
And I think that part of how we sort of make that work or bridge that gap is it's really important to offer a lot of on-ramps to more specialist content domains. Like I think of it as building a highway, but then as much as you can, you provide a lot of exits along the way. You say, hey, are you really passionate about nano banana and image generation? Here's a little sort of exit ramp that you can run down and really explore. Are you passionate about engineering architecture principles, which is the piece I did today, so it's top of mind. Then you can run down that ramp. There's a ton that you can get into around how CS degrees need to change and how engineering architecture principles are changing in the age of AI and so on. Um, and the goal always is to give people enough of a tie-in to the general content stream of AI that they don't feel lost, but to give people enough of the depth to have a sense of where they want to get excited and dive in and get more passionate.
Yeah, I think so much of this is very personal. And so the person who asked or who commented that they're having trouble keeping up, what is your goal in keeping up? What does that actually mean? Are you trying to keep up with the news of AI? Are you trying to keep up with the latest models or programming techniques? Are you just intellectually curious about it? What does keeping up mean for you?
Well, I will say, and I can't answer for the person who asked, but I can answer for the people who have asked that question to me in person. Their motivation has largely been FOMO, right? I don't want to miss out. I don't want to lose my chance in this moment. I want to make sure I find the opportunities and catch up and keep up. And this is where I sort of cycle back around. I say, great, the motivation is fine. Let's find a specific use case where you can get excited, bring your previous work and experience to bear, or if you're getting started in your career, your passion to bear, right? Like what you have a sort of natural interest in. And let's work to iterate from there to get to AI skill sets that are differentiated. And that becomes a much more practical way forward because I fully admit that like keeping up, like it's a lot of work for me. And everyone tells me that like it's even more work for them because they have to read, what I'm producing and try and keep up on everything that I'm seeing as if it's sort of coming at them like baseball's over the baseball plate, right? Baseball's over home plate to borrow a sports metaphor.
Yeah, well, it's like any other very rich and complicated field, but the difference is that there is so much activity that's happening, and the rise of LLMs primarily initially through marketing. That was one of the great breakthroughs of OpenAI was the, the the user interface in front of the AI and then the marketing of it. People tend to now think that that the surface of the glass is the AI when it's not. The AI is something that lives in a data center that is fed by algorithms and fed by data and so forth, and it creates the illusion of AI being this circumscribed domain.
Hmm.
But
I
it's
think
it's
it's
impossible
not.
for one
Yeah.
person to know everything about it.
It's not just impossible to know. I think something else that folks are calling out in the comments that's correct is that AI has this terrifyingly fast progression curve. And so one of the things that means is that even when you think you master a domain, you have to budget more than we traditionally have to stay up to speed on it. And that's sort of a fractal insight, Mike. So what I mean by that is that that's true for individuals keeping up, but it's also true for teams building systems. They have to budget more in terms of sustaining production software than they did before, because if you just say, oh, once every 6 months, we'll do a research spike and see if there's a model that needs to be updated, that's not enough anymore, right? Like you have to think much more deliberately about it. And so part of the art of keeping up then becomes strongly selecting for the kind of news that is relevant to your particular domain. And so you might not care if context windows increase because maybe your particular domain, you're not using a lot of the context windows. And so 10 million tokens doesn't matter. But you might care a lot because you're using a RAG system about a new technology around chunking, right? And how we chunk data and how we find sort of data more useful through semantic retrieval. And so you get really deep on that when that comes out. And I think a lot of it is sort of giving people a sense of, for me, it's where can I give people a sense of the edges of innovation and then help them to start to maybe draw some dotted lines back to what's relevant for them.
I think that is the key is understanding what is relevant for you. By the way, the developers I know who are experienced, the way they build their systems is with interchangeable models. So they're not tied to one particular model because then you're going to lose the opportunity of benefits that might arise from some other model, some new model, or improvements that come out for the existing model. But
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head that it does come down to what is your particular situation? What do you need for either your work or your personal interests or whatever it might be? And then you have to focus there.
And I think that gets at one of the secret keys to success in the AI age. Like we talk a lot about news here on this conversation, and we're talking about keeping up. But one of the underlying themes is having high taste and high agency. And so if you go back to the beginning of our conversation, we talked about Albania and sort of choosing an AI to run procurements. That's a low taste decision. That's a decision where they didn't think through the quality of the decision. They didn't have high grade intention. They didn't think through the downstream implications. And so part of how we humans, quote unquote, keep up in the age of AI is by improving our ability to make really good, strong, opinionated decisions, both about where we want to focus and also about what the shape of the things we build needs to look like to actually add value.
Yeah, it's interesting on LinkedIn, Ryan Kyle says it's not just the activity, it's the pace of change is so great that people believe that whatever they learn now will be out of date in a year or two. And that is a reality. So if you want to be involved in the AI game, so to speak, adapting to changes in the technology, that's part of the deal.
Well, and don't think you can wait till a better time, right? Like I know people who are like, "Well, what if I wait 6 months? Will it stabilize?" And my answer is it'll be harder for you, right? It's going to be harder if you wait 6 months. The slope to get in gets steeper, and so the folks who are in now who are looking at how they can learn and grow, as much as you may feel overwhelmed, you are so much farther ahead than folks who are trying to put this off until things stabilize. And I do know people who think that way, who are like, I'll wait, right? I'll wait until it's really stable and then I'll get in. I'm like, you'll wait a long time and then you'll be really behind.
Yeah, you'll wait till you're alive till past the point where you're alive,
Yeah.
and I'm not joking, because think about this in $100 billion investment between NVIDIA and OpenAI that Jensen Huang said is the largest computing project ever. It was bigger than the Apollo project.
Hmm.
Why are they doing this? They're doing it because demand is for AI, they believe, is increasing. I mean, the number of daily average daily users of OpenAI is extraordinary, and they believe that the lack of infrastructure is a constraining factor. Sam Altman made the comment during that announcement. He said he focuses on three things. He focuses on research and innovation. He focuses on building things that users want, and then he focuses on the infrastructure.
Yeah. And
So
infrastructure drives everything else. Like if you don't have the infrastructure, you can't serve the models.
yeah, and it's the availability of GPUs that enables innovation to advance. And so if we think that, and we know that it's true, that investment in infrastructure is increasing at a vast, vast rate, then that implies that innovation will also be increasing. And let me make one other point here, which is the other day I had as a guest on CXO Talk someone named Paul Doherty. He's an extraordinary person. He was the group CEO of Accenture for technology, which means he was responsible for all of that big company's
Mhm.
technology. He has written books on this topic, and he made a really interesting point. He said, even if you were to cut off development of AI now, that technology is still so useful, it would take years for the business world to catch up.
15, 20 years. It's a generation of technology change. I strongly think that.
So, so for those who think that they can sort of sit this one out because eventually things will settle down, it's the opposite. things will increase from here. And that's for
That's
sure,
right.
I believe.
That's right. And I think, one of the things that I want to call out, and this sort of comes back to pace of change, how we keep up, and also infrastructure. One of the subtexts in the launch of ChatGPT 5 was that they picked a model to release that they had the compute to serve, and they have better models hiding in the warehouse or really at OpenAI's offices that are locally available that they could not release because they didn't have the compute available to serve. And we are probably going to get a look at those models in the next 2 weeks because Sam has suggested that he is going to partially release or release those models for partial audiences where people are willing to pay for them. And so that's extra payments, it's pro tier stuff. And I think that gets at one of the big questions around keeping up, which is keeping up costs money. Keeping up costs the willingness to pay for better models. And I think that one of the things I get concerned about when I think about level playing fields is if you have to pay $200 a month here and $200 a month there, and potentially thousands of dollars in token costs as you build, not everyone is going to be able to sustain that. And how do you make sure that you have a level playing field for folks that want to grow in AI, that want to develop their skills? And I, I do worry a bit about that because as much as intelligence is getting cheaper and benefits are accruing to the plus tier at $20 a month, and then down to free, those benefits are coming later, right, Mike? Like the really nice stuff, the new stuff keeps coming to the pro tier as it does in most software. It's just the consequences are much higher now.
Yeah, and the other thing is how many, if you're an individual, how many pro tiers can you pay for?
Right. It's
Two or
worse than
three,
cable bills.
yeah, 200 or 300 bucks a month for each one. One thing I started to do is use Open Router. Are you familiar with Open Router?
Yeah, I am.
Because I found that except for well for the models that are available like pro deep research is not available, I don't think, through Open Router, but for the models that are available, I found just pay as you go. And it's not like going through u.com or Perplexity. There's no filtering and there's no screwing around with your tokens so that they can save a fraction of a cent. So you pay your money and you just plow forward that way.
Yeah.
But
I think we're also going to get in the next year a generation of personal computers that are going to be designed for local LLM hosting, and that is going to help people with expenses as well. Because you're going to get tools that are capable of running really good models locally. And for many things, you're going to be able to just get the answer locally without any latency, without any cost, and just go on with your day. And there will only be some things where it's like, I need a high grade model or I need to do a particular piece of work in the cloud. Well, now I have to use my paid plan or I have to pay as you go, as you're describing.
uh, you know, we have a couple of really interesting comments on LinkedIn. Let's jump to those. Arsalan Khan says he asks a really interesting question. He says, if you're going to spread the gospel of AI, how can you indoctrinate? I love this, indoctrinate people early on. And where do you start without getting lost in the jargon?
You know what's funny is one of the posts I've thought about doing is a like San Francisco to rest of world dictionary translator, Mike, because I think there is a lot of jargon and it's not always mutually intelligible, right? It's not always immediately obvious what people mean. And I think that one of our jobs is to actually be that translator, to try and make it as clear and legible as possible what people are actually saying in ordinary human conversation, not just Silicon Valley speak.
Yeah, so there's no easy answer. I got sent this week, I forget the person's name, a book that he wrote of the IT dictionary, where he explained in real terms the fancy language. Sometimes we use very fancy language. So instead of saying, I fired Joe's sorry ass, said, well, we had redundancies. Like, what the hell does that mean? Well, if
Right.
you're part of the club, you know what it means, and it means we fired Joe's sorry ass because he wasn't doing a good
Right.
job.
Right. And we have a lot of that around AI, and there's a lot of AI specific terms. Like even what we've been talking about with probabilistic systems versus deterministic systems, that presumes that you understand what deterministic software is. And I tell you what, like if I go to a lot of my family that's not in the AI world and I said we used to run deterministic software, they would look at me like I was talking about, zebras with spots instead of zebras with stripes. Like they just wouldn't get it.
Yeah, and so we have, I mean, but that's a technology problem in general. But to Arsalan's point, if the goal is to enable or support and help this technology to be more broadly disseminated, then the use of that in-group terminology is doing a disservice, and
Mhm.
it's kind of a convenient lazy cop out. I point to myself for saying this.
Well, I think it also comes from where AI stemmed from inside the Silicon Valley universe. Like if you go back 10, 15 years and you look at where the founders of OpenAI were at the time, where was Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic at the time? A lot of this comes from research labs that were highly nerdy, and where nobody else cared about what they were doing, and no one thought it was going to be of any consequence. Like DeepMind comes to mind as one of the key research labs that spawned this whole moment. Um, and that culture is still alive and well at all of these startups that have spun out of this. Like the researchy talking amongst ourselves as if no one is paying attention culture is strong partly because that's how people lived and survived and did their work 10 or 15 years ago. And so now that everyone uses this, we essentially have to come up with language, and as power users or as educators, whatever you want to call us, Mike, we don't get a lot of help from the model makers on using better language. Like famously, ChatGPT is terribly named, right? Like they had a lot of trouble naming it, and then they named it ChatGPT 5, and now it's like 8 ChatGPT 5 models or whatever. The terminology help is not coming from the valley, and so it's up to people like us and people like Dan Shipper and others to figure out how you actually name this stuff.
Well, it depends who your audience is. The model makers are in an interesting position because they have a development role, and the language is useful as a shorthand for people that are fully versed in that language. So instead of saying large language model or whatever it might be, we say LLM.
Say LLM.
But if you ask, I don't know, if I ask my cousin who's a real estate broker and developer in Seattle, I guess he would know what LLM would be. But if I told him, we've been talking about probabilistic versus deterministic models, he'd say, what?
Well, I'll
What?
give you another example. If we talk about agentic primitives, like how many people are going to be like, "Oh yeah, let's talk about agentic primitives," right? Like, and they're just going to sort of get it. It's very off-putting. But if I tell you agents work better when they have common components and tools that are very clearly defined, well, now you start to understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I'm not sure where that leaves us because again, it totally depends who you're talking to. If you are trying to educate the general public, then, excuse me, then of course you want to do the work to explain it and to be clear. If you're talking with technologists, then it already is clear because they know what that means.
Correct. And then you use the shorthand. I think this actually gets at one of the biggest questions we will get answers to in the next 6 months, which is the idea of how you measure AI fluency for a large section of the population. And so I think about that because OpenAI has said they're launching AI fluency certifications. They're the big gorilla in the room, obviously, with their user base. They're launching an AI job market. And once those pieces start to come into place, you are going to see much more uniformity around how people talk about what counts as fluent or not. I think you're still going to have a lot of individual work done for corporations that are in specific domains. It is very much an unsolved problem. How you say, are you good at AI in an interview? Or are you good at AI in your work? Like, we don't really have vocabulary to answer that. We don't have tests to answer that. Part of the problem of answering it is the AI can help on the tests. And so, like, if you give someone a test about AI and they just type into ChatGPT and get answers, they sound really good, but like they don't really understand. Um, so I think that's actually one of the biggest and most interesting questions we're going to get answered in the next few months.
Yeah, it's an issue of the rapid pace of change of AI,
Mhm.
the impact of that AI has had across business and society.
Mhm.
And because it's all happened so quickly, we're still trying to figure it out. There's not a lot of maturity
Yeah.
in the way that you can measure programming. But as I say that, there was also something in the news this week that is very relevant here, which is there was a coding contest, and Google and OpenAI uh, came out on top with their algorithmic challenges, is what they
Mhm.
called it. So what we do have is we have some measures for evaluating the effectiveness of AI on certain types of problems.
Well, and I think this is part of what makes AI feel off-putting is that you're right to call out coding. Coding is an area of enormous investment for all the model makers right now. It's an inherently technical investment area, and it's an area where they see a lot of leverage, right? If you can get code right, then you can unlock a lot of other use cases. But that doesn't make it super intelligible to everybody else. Like if I say that OpenAI released a new model, but it's not really ChatGPT, it's ChatGPT Codex, and it's available in the command line, and you can use it because for nonlinear problem spaces, it's token efficient. It just goes over a lot of people's heads, right? But it's super interesting if you're a developer and it enables you to do a lot of really powerful things.
Yeah, but again, this is a function of audience. Who are you talking to?
Mhm.
This is completely a function in terms of the communication aspect. Now, in terms of the measurement of AI skills, that's a different matter altogether. But you raised a point, and there was a comment on LinkedIn from Ryan who said he wanted to hear us talk. I'm just trying to find it about uh, context windows, RAG, and data pipelines. And
Okay.
I mean, it's an important topic. And obviously, Ryan is a technologist, or he wouldn't use that terminology in the first place. By the way, I think everybody listening to us is probably a technologist, or many
Oh
of the
yeah, like
people.
we're talking to folks that are already passionate about this.
So, but let's talk for a moment about context windows, RAG, and data pipelines, because that's a subject I think that's near and dear to many of our hearts.
I think that one of the things that has been really exciting to me in the last few months is we've moved from this world where we first sort of started building RAG systems and we started to say, okay, RAG systems are primarily a solution to bad context windows. And we're now in a place where context windows are pretty sizable. And we're realizing that RAG systems are part of a larger memory toolkit that enables us to fit the right context in a token efficient way to get a task done. And so we've gotten much more sophisticated in understanding what RAG can and can't do. Like I remember back in the day, it was like, can you put the HR policy handbook into a RAG? And then we hook it up to Slack and people can ask questions of the HR policy handbook. And it was like, ooh, wow, it really works, right? We'll answer the question from the RAG and look at that. It mostly doesn't hallucinate. And didn't we do a great job? And now it's very much like, okay, so what component of this needs semantic meaning retrieval? So that's a RAG. What component of this do we filter on the retrieval record so that we don't, we can disambiguate? It's gotten much more sophisticated, but that allows us to do much more powerful things in production systems.
Well, one of the very important aspects here is if you are in business, for example, or you have a body of material, you want to be able to query just that body. Now, what's interesting is you want the LLM to have a general understanding, but to differentiate, to clearly segment its general understanding from the specific data that you're providing in the RAG system.
That's
And
right.
and
Yeah.
that's the hard part, because you don't want, because if you're making a query on a particular body of data, you want the response to be based on that data, but you need the kind of general background information to provide the context of understanding what the LLM is actually looking at.
Well, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. So there are agentic workflows that are very low inference where you don't want the general background knowledge and you just want it to do an essentially an operation with text and come back. We forget that these things are basically calculators for text. And so you can get it to just do that at a very sort of low temperature for the model and it can come back. But there's other cases that are inference where you want it to reason, you want it to think, you want it to look at multiple sources at once and come up with an assessment. And those are the cases where you need to really carefully formulate what context you give it, because the context ends up being a rudder that steers how the LLM uses its general purpose training along with the input you give it to make a response.
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky problem because, well, for example, with CXO Talk, I have all of these transcripts of CXO, hundreds and hundreds of CXO Talk shows. And I would like to be able to query that body of work to say, what did all the CIOs in this corpus say about a particular topic? Or what did all the CMOs say? What did the
Yeah.
how did they compare? And I tried this a couple of years ago, and it came out with these beautiful quotes. And then I started going back like an audit trail to dig into it, and I
And there weren't
discovered
quotes there, were there, Mike?
it was totally made up. I said, okay, well, this is not working.
So I have some specific advice here for folks watching. If you want accurate, state-of-the-art retrieval from a collection of documents right now, the most accurate responses I have found are from Notebook LM. Now, Notebook LM is not shareable. I had someone trying to share a Notebook LM link in the chat earlier on Substack, and of course it doesn't work. They don't really wire it for sharing very easily, but it's very, very good at retrieval. What it's not good at is insightfulness off that retrieval. And I think we humans forget that, because for us, it's like one process to think of something, remember it, meditate on it, metabolize it, and generate an insight. And for an LLM, that's not the same thing. Like they're going to retrieve it and they need to retrieve it accurately. And then an insight needs to be developed from that. And I actually find that that is one of the really hard problems right now is you have to figure out how to get a system that can both accurately retrieve and also then reflect and infer in a way that's useful.
Well, that's getting better and better and better. And that's
Mhm.
when you throw compute at a problem, when you throw more compute. I mean, for example, ChatGPT Pro, the 200 version, $200 a month version, if you ask it to do deep research, it does a more thorough and, dare I use the term, insightful job than if you're using the free version or the plus version. Why
Yeah.
is it doing that? It's throwing more compute at the problem. It's
And
throwing
this
more resources at the problem.
and this gets back at essentially the idea that like a lot of our performance as workers is going to be tied to the ability to accurately throw tokens at problems. And what does it mean to throw the right tokens in the right quantity at the right problem?
And that's precisely why NVIDIA and OpenAI have just committed to spending $100 billion.
Yep. Yep. We come
Like,
full circle.
yeah, that's exactly the reason why. Because with so many of these problems, yes, we're always talking about data, but at some point, it's not just the data, it's the ability to drive inference from that data.
That's right. That's right. Um, do we, I know we only have 15 minutes left. Do we want to get to any other pieces of news before we close out our conversation here, Mike? Is there something we've missed so far?
Oh, there's so much
There's
that's
so much.
going on. I'm just looking through. Oh, here's a really interesting one. I I think we should talk more about how the leader of Albania was pelted with trash for appointing an AI powered minister to his cabinet. I mean, I think nothing is going to beat that one. That one falls into the truth is stranger than fiction category.
I think one of the interesting things about that is that you're going to start to see countries that have smaller footprints innovate very rapidly to see if they can get ahead in the AI race, and it will have widely varying results as you see there.
Yeah, and hey, Estonia, we're looking at you. I mean, look at Estonia that has been very far advanced just digitally in
Yep.
general, doing smart things, not
Right.
I was going to say stupid things, but like Albania at the moment. And who knows, maybe the Albania leader has a vision that we don't have. But on the subject of the vision of leaders,
Mm,
there was an article this week about Klarna. You know Klarna, the pay as you go company?
I do. In fact, I've written about them on the Substack.
So Klarna's CEO uses AI to write code and test ideas before asking engineers for help. And so he'll dive into the weeds and give a prototype or, a program he's written and say, hey, what about this? That's like a serious level of micromanagement.
So I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing across not just Klarna, but Toby Lutke at Shopify, and there's some others as well, is we're seeing the return of a deeply invested founder, not CEO, a deeply invested founder, where the idea is that founders recognize this as an existential moment for their companies, and they come back and they bet extensively on their personal vision, which they then translate through these sort of direct action. And so Klarna, like it looks like, CEOs using, I don't know, maybe he's using Lovable, right? It's a Swedish company, or something else. At Shopify, it's more about instilling a culture across the entire business and how does Toby drive that. I think about the founder of Intercom, who sort of had a conversation recently talking about his choice to come back to Intercom, his choice to come back at a moment when AI was becoming prevalent and to recognize that he needed to bet the company on Finn and their AI assistant around customer success. These are all examples of ways that founders are getting very involved. And I think whether we call it micromanagement or not, I expect more of it, not less of it, because of the existential stakes that these founders feel that they have to face for the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely part that and part the founders, CEOs are trying to figure out how all of this stuff fits. But one of the articles said that the Shopify CEO was more like a showrunner or studio head, setting
Mhm.
the theme, the rules, and he trusts his people as opposed to, look, if a CEO is in the weeds writing code, whether it's doing vibe coding or sitting down and writing code, I would argue that CEO is doing the wrong thing.
I have a little spicy take here. I think that we judge most of that post hoc as outsiders, Mike, and we judge it based on results. So, as an example, Steve Jobs famously did exactly that. Like he would go in and he dropped an early prototype of the iPhone into a fish tank and watched the bubbles coming up and yelled at the engineers and said, "You see those bubbles? There's still space in this thing. You can make it smaller, right?" And they'd said they couldn't. He was absolutely what we would call a micromanager, but because of the results, we don't typically describe him that way. And so I think it's actually an interesting question how we classify that term and what counts as good or bad. It's often what we judge the results by.
Yeah, no, that's a really really good point. Not too long ago, I interviewed on CXO Talk the CEO of Zendesk,
Hmm.
and he was describing their AI transformation, and he was really instigating that
Hmm.
transformation because he recognized, the company recognized, and he recognized that they were going to be disrupted.
Hmm.
And so there was really there was no viable alternative but to disrupt themselves. But that's different from rolling up your sleeves and diving into the code.
Well, and I think that there's a difference too between choosing to dive into the code as a non-technical CEO and choosing to dive into the code as a technical CEO. Like if a technical CEO or CTO dives into the code, they have an extensive background, right? Like they're not diving in as an amateur. Whereas if a non-technical CEO decides to pick up code and like generate expectations with it, like very famously, like vibe coded artifacts are extremely useful at a certain scale. And then they will sort of scale out, and you have to build production systems with them that look really different. It is not necessarily clear that like a non-tech CEO, like perhaps the Klarna CEO, really understands that distinction when he's making his ask. Like this took me 5 minutes to vibe code. You should be able to do it in an hour, right? Like those kinds of expectations get really easy to say, but they don't necessarily reflect reality.
To change gears here for a minute, because Ryan on LinkedIn is raising some financially related questions, and we only have a few minutes left, but he's raising some really good points. He is wondering what we think about how we manage the future depreciation of models, either by providers or businesses. And it seems, he says, like everyone is optimizing for cost and efficiency, but not thinking about migration. And so, how do we deal with vendor lock in? Like, are we concerned about that, say, with cloud providers? And what does that actually mean for LLMs?
Everyone I know who is building production AI systems at any kind of scale refuses to accept vendor lock-in, Mike. Like they will not accept any kind of contract that keeps them sort of fenced in around a particular model. They insist from the get-go on having the option to switch to any model they choose. And that is part of why, even though Microsoft has a relationship with OpenAI, their Azure instance ensures that you can get any kind of LLM you would want in a secure Azure container, because they know that's what the big companies expect.
And Sam Altman was very, very clear that his deal with NVIDIA is not exclusive. I mean, they're looking to get uh, infrastructure every place they can possibly get it.
Yeah, I think they have an ongoing conversation with AMD, actually. It wasn't nearly as well sort of publicized, but I've heard some sort of a few stories around that. So we'll see how that pans out.
Between OpenAI and AMD.
AMD, yeah.
That's interesting. I had the CTO of AMD as a guest on CXO Talk a while ago. Um, but as far as the lock in, yeah, if you're building on an LLM, you shouldn't be tied to one vendor. Of course, moving workloads from one infrastructure to another is not as easy to do.
No, that can be tricky. The other thing that we might just sort of tip our hats to here in the closing minutes is what does it mean to generate um, any kind of return on a depreciating model as a model maker? That's one of the things that we need to sort of figure out as an industry in order to make these sustainable long term. And I think that the model that Dario Amade suggested in an interview a couple weeks ago is probably worth talking about a little bit more because it comes from a really interesting place. So I don't know how familiar you are with Hollywood and the motion picture model, but fundamentally, the studio model is framed around this idea that motion pictures are projects, and you make your money or lose your money on a motion picture basis, right? And just like models, motion pictures are depreciating assets. They're worth a lot when you release them, and then the new Marvel movie is worth a lot less in 6 months. And Dario essentially suggested that's how we should grade models, that a model's worth a ton when it's released, and then we should grade it on a profit and loss basis based on that model rather than based on a fiscal year or something else. And I think that's, the ball is still up in the air. We'll see where it lands, but it's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting idea simply because we know that the models, like new versions of software, uh, will have less utility over time, but we can go back to traditional software. That's why we have versions, because,
Yeah.
version one is not going to be as good as version two. And, you know, Windows 10, well, sometimes there are errors. People might say Windows 10 is better than Windows 9, or Windows 10
And
is better than Windows 11, whatever.
I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is, and this is sort of a cheat code for folks that wonder, like, why do I choose like particular tools that I recommend? What is it that makes them special to me or that makes them something I feel comfortable recommending? The answer, increasingly, is that I look at that versioning. I look at the ability of the tool maker to ship meaningful improvements on a really regular basis because I am betting on the trajectory of the software, not just the present state. And when AI is sort of shipping as fast as it is, I think that becomes more and more relevant as you think about what software you choose. As you look at the team, like, is the team shipping quickly? Is the team shipping new versions? Is the team able to iterate in a way that is meaningful?
It- yeah, all of these. And Ryan comes back, by the way, with another question, just really quickly. If you tune your context and prompt engineering to a particular model, how do you manage those changes if the model could change from underneath the system at any given time? I was going to say, the more tightly bound you are to the model, the more you're at risk, but the more you're optimizing for that particular model. So it's a trade-off, really.
Yeah, this is where sort of the idea of sort of agentic modular architectures comes into play. Like, you want to separate out like the components that you have for prompt, the components for retrieval, the components for model selection as much as you can, so that if you have to make a change and optimize for a particular model, it's in one particular place in the ecosystem, and you make those iterations in a way that's very discoverable, that leaves an artifact trace that you can come back to.
So we're just about out of time, and I want to invite whoever's listening to connect on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm sure Nate would love to have your
Come see me on
connections.
Substack.
We have this divide here.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, so I want to pull the Substack people to connect to me on LinkedIn because I'm not on Substack.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think we would love it for folks who are on one platform, the other, to come over to the other and sort of see us. And I think what's interesting is these communities are a little bit distinct. Like, I know that like the Substack community, like there's been a long running conversation in the chat here, Mike, about how you share Nate's articles and what is the best way to make sense of that. And so folks are like coming back with their own essentially home baked RAG systems with my articles in them so that folks can sort of retrieve them and make sense of that. And I love that. It's a wonderful culture. So yeah.
Well, you've built an incredible community over there on Substack, and kudos to everybody who's there and engaged. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's lots of fun. It keeps me entertained. It keeps me inspired to write. Yeah, yeah, it's been really fun. Any parting words, Mike, before we head out?
I really, folks who are listening on either Substack or LinkedIn, what suggestions do you have? This is number three that Nate and I have done this, an hour and a half long.
I'll tell you one suggestion that came in right away, Mike. We had David in the Substack was saying, "Can we vote to extend this by an hour?"
Okay,
So
that's a
like,
good
there's lots of
suggestion.
interest in it. We'll call it that.
Okay, so extending it is one. If you have other ideas, uh, let Nate know or let me know. But we want your feedback because we want to make this responsive to you. What kind of topics should we be talking about? What level of technical depth? Do you want to talk? Do you want us to talk about news more or technical development? So give us feedback, okay? That'd really be
I'll open up
helpful.
a thread for that in the Substack chat for folks. We got tons of responses last time, so I'll do that again.
That sounds great. And I guess we really are out of time. I mean, we could go on for another hour without any difficulty.
We
But
could, but I'm gonna have to run here. This one needs a little bit more attention, so she's gonna wave bye bye.
okay, bye. Everybody, thank you so much. Nate, it's a pleasure as always and look forward to the next time.
Until next time, Mike, it's always a delight. Bye bye now.
Bye now. Have a great day, everyone.